Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Kevin Tallec Marston, and it is my pleasure as president of the Society for American Soccer History, also known as SASH, to welcome you to our December 2025 First Friday session, the final one of the year. Founded in 1993, SASH works to promote, facilitate, and disseminate research into the rich history and heritage of soccer in the United States. You can find us best at two places: on the web at ussoccerhistory.org and on our social media accounts with Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and X, and Blue Sky accounts. Please do follow the First Friday sessions at hashtag FFSS and post about them so that we can repost from our SASH accounts. A reminder that our SASH website, maintained by Ed Farnsworth, has many excellent resources, including a growing number and a growing collection of digitized resources from archives ranging across the globe and featuring a wonderful series of clips from American soccer heritage. We encourage you actually to support our ongoing crowdfunding campaign to digitize more of this material and showcase U.S. soccer history. All of our sessions are available on YouTube and also as podcasts. Thank you to Brian Corsta. Indeed, thanks to our amazing volunteer membership for managing all of SASH's activities. Are you working on something that you might like to present at a future SASH First Friday? If yes, then please do reach out to the board. All ideas are welcome from current or future members to be. If a shorter format would interest you, or to just float some ideas that maybe are not yet ready to present in a 20-minute format, then we will also organize shorter sessions with several speakers. And if writing rather than speaking is your thing, then we also welcome written contributions for our SASH website on all areas of soccer-related history. Reach out to us if you have any questions. If you're not yet a member, please, you can join through the SASH website, and we welcome new members with open arms and friendly feet. Please visit our website and click on Join SASH so you'll be eligible to receive the newsletter. Today, I would like to welcome our speaker, Dr. Conor Curran. He has taught sport history at the International Centre for Sport History and Culture at Montfort University in Leicester, UK, as well as at the universities of Giessen and Marburg. Conor was previously also a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Education at Trinity College Dublin, and he's published extensively on the history of sport and society in Ireland. Dr. Curran will not be a new face for some of SASH members, as this is his actual second time speaking on our First Friday program, so this makes him one of SASH's own blue chippers. Today, Conor will discuss the experiences of another group of valuable contributors to the American soccer scene. This is the story of Irish players, both male and female, and their experiences at American colleges while on U.S. soccer scholarships, all from his latest book, Blue Chippers from the Emerald Isle, A History of Irish Footballers and Scholarships in the USA in the 20th Century, published recently by Peter Lang. If you've not obtained your copy yet, there is a link in the video description to the Peter Lang website. Conor, we are happy to have you back, and the floor, or the pitch rather, is yours.
That's great, Kevin. Thanks very much. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for having me. Very grateful to Sash for bringing me on the show again. Kevin mentioned, I think it was 2021. I did a talk based on my MEd thesis I'd done while I was in Trinity College doing the postdoc. I started doing the MEd thesis, and really it was about the Irish players who'd gone to America on soccer scholarships who'd come back to Ireland. So I'd interviewed 10 of those, and they were all men. And after I'd done that, I decided, if I'm going to do a book of this, I'd have to expand it. And what I did was I began to source players who'd stayed in America, and male and female. And I ended up with, I think, 29 players for interviews. And I also interviewed Ed Kelly, who's one of the most successful coaches in college soccer history, I think. So, yeah, so just to begin, I'll just give you an overview of, I've discussed the origins there of the book. A lot of it was started off with newspaper research, as these things often do. Started looking at Irish newspaper research archives, and then I extended to look at newspapers.com, the American newspapers. So I had a total of 19 male players I interviewed, um, and 10 female players who have stayed there. So just kind of crunching the data, like from the newspaper sources and from word of mouth from players, what they told me, and counting them all up. So the first player would have gone to America in 1969. That was Greg McElroy. He was a Shamrock Rovers player, and he moved to the University of South Florida. Um, and so he was the only player just in the late 60s. I suppose that's when international players were starting to come over for soccer scholarships in that period. Um, and then in the 1970s, what happened was that there was more of a link between the University of South Florida after McElroy had gone there and with Ireland. Now, the reason that he was able to move at that time, there was a priest in Summerhill College in Sligo called Father Ricky Devine, and he had contacts in Clearwater. I think he did some pastoral work in Clearwater in Florida, and I gotten to know Dan Holcomb, who was the University of South Florida coach at that time. So that was just one example of how this pipeline had begun to develop. Into the 1970s, then there was more players who started moving, and I'll discuss them shortly. Um, and then into the 1980s, it grew, it expanded into more colleges as well around mainly around the East Coast, I would say. And I suppose obviously proximity to Ireland was a help, but and the cultural links in New York and Boston, places like that. But the females, then I'll discuss that as well. The female players, most of whom were Republic of Ireland internationals, and it seemed to be through this kind of network of Republic of Ireland players that the female players began to move. Anne Byrne was the first one in 1985 when she moved to Villanova. So really, they were kind of following a longer sort of a pipeline of Irish athletes moving for scholarships. The first one, Tom Hunt, who's written on the history of sport in Ireland and on his studies in Westmeath. He also did some work on athletics, and he looked at the Villanova migration pattern. And Jimmy Reardon was the first athlete to go there in 1949, and then obviously you had others then who moved after that, like Ronnie Delaney, and going into the 70s, John Tracy, Eamon Coughlin, and most of those top Irish athletes, I suppose, who did well in the Olympics, Sonia Sullivan, they would have trained really through the scholarship system. But I suppose into the 1990s, then there was a kind of slightly more males identified and more females. Now, one thing that I will say is that up until then, it had been pretty much word of mouth and coming from newspaper reports, people seeing newspaper reports, maybe getting in touch with a player who'd gone, writing to universities. But in the 1990s, there was actually a course set up in Dublin in a place called College Giessen and Finglas. They did a soccer course there, and where players had the opportunity to take the SAT exams, and at that stage they'd formed connections, and there was trials held, and people were still writing to colleges and American universities, and they still went over through word of mouth. But the College Genius system was a big help, and it's still running today. Um, so that's just a kind of a brief overview of the migration patterns. Um, I'll just look at some of the players now. So Fergus Hopper, now he wasn't the first player to move to the States. Greg McElroy was the first identified in 1969 when he moved to the University of South Florida. So Fergus Hopper he was playing for Summerhill College in Sligo, who had a good team in the Irish School Soccer Cup. I suppose one of the things I've looked at the book as well, you have to remember that soccer in Irish schools was kind of didn't really develop really until the late 60s when they had 1968, the Irish School Soccer Cup was set up. Now, there was always strong schoolboy teams in Dublin, like you've probably heard of the famous Home Farm, Stella Morris, St. Kevin's Boys, Liam Brady's team, but soccer was really kind of frowned upon in Irish schools. And since 1922, when partition happened and the I suppose the primary and the secondary school East certainly became more sort of nationalist and Catholic, and it was really Gaelic games that were promoted. Christian Brothers were heavily involved in this. Um, so it wasn't until the 1968, when the Irish Universities Association got involved, that the first school soccer cup for school teams was held. And Fergus Hopper was one of the players who played for Summerhill. Summerhill was I mentioned their Father Divine there. He was really the main man there. I suppose he was involved in the Summerhill teams. He was also involved in the Connacht Basketball Association. He was involved in the Sligo Rovers local team. So Fergus would have been the first player. He wasn't one of the. I suppose he was a player who really acted as kind of a gatekeeper for me into the interviews and just giving me an overview of how the whole thing worked. A very, very friendly guy, very Hall of Fame winner at the University of South Florida. He actually won the Athlete of the Year there in 1977. Um, he'd been they'd made an attempt to draft him. The Washington Diplomats made an attempt to draft him in 1975. Now he was there from 73 to 77, and this NASL draft came up. He actually turned it down because he'd come from a background where he was working in a bank in Ireland, and he did the SAT to go to the States, but I suppose he kind of was very kind of business minded and that in the back of his head. He'd been on the Irish youth team with Liam Brady and Frank Stapleton, and he told me he kind of knew he wasn't at that level. Like he was good, but he wasn't. He didn't think he was going to make it in England. So he took up a business course in the University of South Florida, did really well. So in 1977, he got this award for Athlete of the Year. I think he was also in line for the the Herman Trophy. I think it's obviously the soccer version of the Heisman Trophy. He was in line for that too, but he didn't get it. Like he was pretty close to winning that as well, I think. But he so he was really one of the leading Irish soccer scholars in America in the early 70s. He was the term I've used for the book Blue Chippers from the Emerald Isle. There was a quote in one of the newspapers from Dan Holcomb, the coach at the University of South Florida, and he was talking with Fergus Hopper, who was a centre half, and he said, "This boy is a real blue chipper." So I suppose that shows the esteem he was held. And when he stopped playing, he actually they retired his number 5 jersey. And he told me a funny story about that. He said that he was told he retired it, and then he was over there a few years. I suppose a few years ago, he got the Hall of Fame award and that, and he saw somebody wearing his number 5 jersey during the match. So I wasn't actually retired at all. But anyway, that was kind of the esteem he was held in. He came back to Ireland after that. Didn't think he would make it in the NASL. Thought he had a better chance coming back to Ireland, getting the job in the bank. And now, one of the things I'll touch on in this PowerPoint is the players when they came back to Ireland. He was based in Dublin, and for those of you who know Ireland, Sligo was his hometown, so he came back to play for Sligo Rovers. There would have been a lot of traveling involved at the weekends, and eventually he just decided, part-time soccer and things like the facilities weren't as good as they were in America and as Ireland in the 70s, of course. So he decided to just focus on his bank career, and there's a few other players who were kind of like that, but very kind of business minded. And he possibly could have had a career like at a higher level, maybe in the League of Ireland, I would say, but he just was more business focused, and he went on to become a bank manager and has retired there recently. But so yeah, he was one of the first players I interviewed, and I suppose really if anybody reads the book, they'll see he was like a key figure throughout it. Like he's a pretty colorful character. So by about 1975, through this sort of network of players in the University of South Florida, there'd been a few more who'd moved over there. Con Foley, Larry Byrne, Shane Smith and Fergus there, who's there on the front row on the right. Um, so there was a kind of an Irish kind of theme developing. Now there was other Irish players who started moving over. There was a player called Liam Lawler who moved to Villanova University in 1976. Um, but I didn't get to interview him now. So at that stage, it was becoming more international, I suppose. Um, another two players that I interviewed, John Kent. He also moved. He was also from Sligo. He also moved to the University of South Florida in '76. Now, John Kent got a bad knee injury in his first year at University of South Florida, and he I think he tore the ligaments in his knee, so he missed a lot of that first year. Completed his first year nonetheless. Came back home, and while he was home in the first summer, he was playing Gaelic football for Sligo. He played for his club, who were kind of strong in the Sligo Championship, got into the Connacht Championship, and the GA season sort of overlapped into September when he really would have been going back to university, and he just decided to stay. And like he told me, he did regret that, not going back to America, but he became a very successful businessman after that. He has a sports shop in Sligo town, and it seems he was very highly decorated as well by his county Sligo and won lots of honours playing for them. So he features in the book as well. Another player then, Mick Reardon, went to Davis and Elkins. One of the players I didn't get to interview was Mickey Whelan, who was, I think he went to three different universities in America. He went there to Davis and Elkins in Virginia, I think. Originally, Mickey Whelan, he did that because he couldn't get on the PE course in Ireland. Up until 1973, there wasn't really a proper PE course for male students in Ireland, and he'd gone over there, and he came back to teach PE in Ireland when he got qualifications. Later, heavily involved in GA with the Dublin GA team, but Mickey Whelan was able to act as a kind of a gatekeeper to people like Mick Reardon, who moved over there then after that. Mick Reardon had trials in England. He played for Ireland underage the whole way up. He had trials in England as well, and he had trials with Wolves, I think, in Leeds United. Didn't make it and decided to go to America, and has stayed over there and got into coaching, and another successful businessman. But strangely enough, when he finished his undergraduate course, he came back to Ireland, played a bit with Home Farm, I think, in Dublin. And like a few other players I interviewed, he decided to go back to America to do a master's. So that was kind of a recurring theme amongst these players too. They might come back to Ireland briefly and then realize, I might do better in America. And I suppose they would have had the contacts in America. They would have had the networks. They knew how the system worked at that stage after doing undergraduate. So Mick went back to the States and did a master's and stayed over there and got involved in coaching. So they were the main players I interviewed from the 70s. Moving into the 1980s, Penn State University recruited Niall Harrison there in the white jersey there. He was from Sligo as well. So it was a pretty strong Sligo contingent moving to universities on scholarships. Another one there was Brian Ainscough. He's actually Hall of Fame. He played for Fairleigh Dickinson. He actually another player who stayed in the States after the scholarship, and he played in some of the sort of semi-professional leagues. He he reckoned that the best money probably was in indoor soccer at that time in the major indoor soccer league in the early 80s. But he said there was a strong Portuguese league, I think, in and around Boston. So there would have been money kind of available to players who played in these sort of semi-professional leagues after the NASL had gone into decline as well. But Brian Ainscough, more recently, he came back to Ireland and he took over the ownership of Dundalk for a while. But I think, as far as I know, he's back in in the States now. But again, pretty interesting character. He reckoned he would never have had a degree in Ireland if he hadn't gone to the States. Like he was good at maths, he said, but just with the point system in Ireland to get into university, which was one of the reasons I suppose these players looked to go to the USA because the access was a bit easier for them with the SATs, and they were good at soccer. They could get in, but he stayed over there anyway. He's still over there, I think, and pretty successful by all accounts. So Seton Hall University then, in the middle there's Ed Kelly, who was coach. Ed Kelly was actually didn't move as a soccer scholar or anything like that. He moved with his family in the middle of the 60s. They just moved. They were from Crumlin in Dublin, and they just moved to the USA to live there. He actually told me he sort of took part in the Vietnam War. Then he joined the U.S. Army, and he didn't actually fight in Vietnam, but he was a worked in Thailand, I think, at one of the bases where he was like a fireman who was there to put out any fires or anything for planes, for U.S. planes that landed there. But he got some coaching anyway with Fairleigh Dickinson in the early 80s, and actually in 1975 he played for Hartford Bicentennials, and he said, yeah, it was full time, like the training was full time, but there wasn't really much money to be made for a player who maybe wasn't at the level of Cruyff or Neeskens, or Georgie Best or those world superstars. So he got into coaching in the 80s, and while he was at Seton Hall in the mid 80s, he recruited Ian Hennessy, who's in the picture there somewhere. Ian Hennessy was he was born in England, but he was living in Cork, and he was part of the Irish schoolboy setup. He had trials with Arsenal when Niall Quinn and Tony Adams were there, and he reckoned that he just wasn't gonna make it at Arsenal, and so he was working in Cork as a cab driver. I think he said he was earning something like £1 an hour or something, working late at night, and the opportunity to came up to go to America, and with Seton Hall. I don't think they ever won the national championship in that period. I think they got to the semi-finals a few times, but they didn't actually win it. But they had a pretty strong team, I think, by all accounts, in the mid 80s. Um, so the one player here, Trevor Scanlon, I suppose really I found him to be one of the kind of exceptions in that he went to Penn State, did a degree there, came back, and got into the League of Ireland. And he was from Sligo, again, the Summerall connection. Got into the League of Ireland and ended up playing for Finn Harps now, which would be probably about 70 or 80 miles from Sligo. Finn Harps and Ballafane, Donegal. Now he had a really long career in the League of Ireland with Finn Harps, and he is probably really an exception. Most people I interviewed who came back didn't really have careers in the League of Ireland. Didn't They were used to good facilities in America. They came back home, and it was only part time, and they had to work, and some of them, as I'll discuss, didn't want to be training in the evenings after that, after working from 8 to 6 or whatever. So Trevor, yeah, he's probably one of the exceptional players. Now he didn't do a masters or go back to state training. He just stayed in Ireland. And one of the reasons he told me why bother playing League of Ireland, and he said part time, and he said, like, it was the local pride. It was for him. It was his family was there watching. His parents would go and watch him. His aunts and uncles would go and watch him. And he said, you know, people talk about this local pride in the GA a lot, like in Ireland, but he actually felt that he had this really strong local pride in his own um, locality and playing soccer at a high level in Ireland. Gareth O'Sullivan, then he went to he was in Memphis, and he'd moved over from Mayo. He again, a player who possibly could have been. He had the misfortune. There was an Arsenal scout came to watch him play in Mayo, in a match that he'd scored 5 goals in. and at the last minute the venue was changed, and the Arsenal scout didn't get to the game and didn't see him, so he missed out in that way. But he had a career afterwards where he finished in Memphis, got into coaching a lot, but he also came back to Europe as well, and he had gone. He went to Coventry City, had trials there, didn't make it. He was supposed to sign for Clyde, um, and I think the manager was sacked at the last moment, and he didn't get in there. He trained with AFK Gothenburg when they were in the Champions League, so he was trying to kind of get a professional career full time after coming back from America, but I suppose he might have had the networks. He wasn't in Europe long enough at that stage, or and I suppose really as I'll conclude really later on, there weren't many players who were able to break into British soccer really when they did come back from the States. But he played a bit of indoor soccer as well, I think, in the one of the indoor leagues. And he said it was just sprinting, flat out sprinting for 10 minutes when you came on. Like it was just really fast paced. But they had big crowds and everything. I think it was in Indianapolis or somewhere. But yeah, I think he's still over there coaching, and he's actually been able to recruit some of the female players that I'll talk about shortly. Two other players too, Richie Grant, and uh, he moved to Green Mountain in Vermont. John Lynch there along with them. The two of them did a course in Dublin at College Giessen, and how they'd actually been recruited was there was a player who'd come back from the scholarship system, just came in to give a talk, left a brochure behind him about American soccer, and the two of them started reading that, got interested, wrote some letters, um, and they were basically sending newspaper cuttings to the coaches in America. I mean, Richie Grant said, "There's no way, as a coach now, there's no way he would sign somebody off a newspaper cutting, or at this stage." But they were recruited by Green Mountain in Vermont in 1989, the two of them, and Richie Grant has gone on to be a coach there. He's coached with University of California and Bakersfield, and uh, so he's still over there as well. Now, to move on to the female players, as I mentioned earlier on, the very first player to be recruited on a soccer scholarship, female player, was Anne Byrne. Now, she'd actually grown up in inner city Dublin. Her father had played Gaelic football for Roscommon in the 1940s in one of the All Irelands. He had a strong interest in sport, knew all about the American system. She didn't have a girls' team to play for when she was growing up. She actually ended up playing for Belvedere with boys, and then I think she later they developed a girls' team. But she was interesting because she didn't actually do the SAT exam, as far as I know. She got a letter. She got an essay that her cousin helped her to write. She told me she just wasn't into academic stuff at school, and her cousin had written a letter, and it was she was recruited to Villanova. Um, I think one of the coaches there was a professor there who'd asked the president of the college to sponsor her, so she moved over in 1985. Now, I suppose Irish female scholars in any sport didn't arrive there until the 80s. There was Michelle Walsh, who was there in 1980, I think, an athlete. She got an athletic scholarship. There was another big woman called Marita Walton Lanigan. She moved there in 79. But Anne Byrne was definitely the first Irish born female player to move in 85. And just looking at some of the other, I mean, some of you will be able to tell me better about this, but um, I was looking through the female soccer scholarships when they really started, and I have sort of traced going back, the whole history of women's soccer in the colleges too in the book. There was a player called Joan Dunlap who moved to University of North Carolina in 1983. She was recruited by Anson Dorrance. There was another girl called Katri Hodgson, came to the University of Vermont on a track scholarship in the late 1980s. Now, a lot of these universities there didn't award soccer scholarships to women in the 1980s, really. So Um, I suppose Anne Byrne, I can't say she was the first ever soccer scholar in America. It's kind of, kind of tricky to define. Some people previously would have been there to play soccer and they might have done a different scholarship, maybe in athletics or something. But she stayed over there anyway, and um, actually, she married somebody from Chicago. She stayed there and she got a green card. I haven't really discussed green cards and that yet, but she was able to get a green card and stay over there, which I suppose one of the problems players would have faced when they finished was they had 1 year to do a master's maybe on a postgraduate visa, but then after that they had to start thinking about how they were going to get permanent residency in the States. And she was able to get a green card. She married someone there, and she's still over there in Chicago. Yeah, she played with men's soccer into her 40s, and mainly indoor soccer in Chicago because I think because of the weather in the winter and so on. Another interesting player was Catherine Byrne, who went to Methodist College. She was recruited in '87. She'd been an Irish international, and she'd written to Anson Dorrance and a few others. She had a bad knee injury. She had tore her cruciate ligament, and she got the operation done just before she went to America by one of the first surgeons to do it in Ireland. Brian Hurston was his name, and she spent the first year just recovering from that, and then afterwards, then she completed her. But again, another player who wouldn't have been from a sort of an academic background, she made no bones about that. She said if she hadn't gone to America, she would never have undertaken a degree. And once she was there and she saw the opportunities for her, she just got stuck into it and did her best and everything, and ended up like with lots of different awards and with Methodist College. Stayed over there and did some coaching. Now, she actually came back to Ireland to do. She qualified as a physical education teacher. Came back to Ireland. I think she had to do another course here to teach here. I'm just conscious of time. I'll just move on. Two other players there. Patricia um, Hughes and Colette Gilligan moved in the 80s. They would have been on the Irish team. One thing I will say is once these players moved to America, these female players, they just forgot about their chances of getting an Irish team because the Irish women's team at that time weren't willing to pay the fees for them to get them back home. So they kind of knew that if they moved to America, they could have better playing facilities, opportunities, coaching opportunities, get the degree. But as Republic of Ireland internationals, there was a kind of informal policy that, well, if you go to the States, we're not going to bring you back for matches. So that was unfortunate for them. It's obviously different now. But another player there, Noreen Herlihy, she's become a coach. She's from Cork. She has become a coach over there. Started off, thought she had a scholarship in a college in Salem, went over there, found out because the college was only Division Three, they couldn't actually give her a scholarship. She got in touch with William Skip Mortimer. I think he was a basketball coach. He got her onto a foundation course then, and she was able to get into a degree course and finish that and have a great career playing there. And that's another Irish player, Ashley Meany. I think she later coached. So two other players there, Ruth Keegan and Claire Scanlon. Claire Scanlon, I suppose, is really exceptional because she was an Irish international. She really tried to have a professional career after she finished. She's played in Japan. She's played in England with Leeds. She played in Ireland as well for Shelburne part time, but in the end, she ended up going back to the States to uh, Troy University, I think, where she did a master's there. So she was really an all rounder. Like she was played cricket, and I think she was one of the first girls to play hurling or play hurling for a boys team in Croke Park back in the 80s as well. So really, really top athlete. Um, a few others I interviewed as well. Paul Ty, who Hall of Fame at Caldwell University, and Paddy McDade from Donegal, my own home county, who did a PE course over there in the University of Cleveland, but came back home. So he came back home. He played locally for his team. He was just happier to do that. Play locally in Donegal. I think he had to do a course another PE course there. So one thing I would say was the PE qualifications some players had when they came back to Ireland, they weren't as well recognised. Whereas those who'd worked in the bank and finance, they kind of pretty much walked into bank jobs. Brian Murphy was had gone to America in '95. He'd been the Kerry minor goalkeeper, won All Ireland, went to College Dublin, had played soccer for Kilkenny City. He went to Boston University. 1999, he was reading an advert in the Boston Globe for um, bank staff in the Bank of Ireland. Came back home. Probably could have had a League of Ireland career, but he had a few tryouts when he came back, but decided that working from 8 to 6 and then having to go training in the evening after that didn't really suit him. So he just played locally. He played Gaelic for Dublin as well. So Brian was really helpful too in putting acting as a gatekeeper for the interview players. One of his teammates at College Egypt was Tim Cummins, who now works in the government in Argentina. He'd gone to Mercy University in '95 as well. And yeah, um, again, just moving on. That's actually the College Egypt team from '95. There's Brian Murphy in the front row there. Ross Hainsworth was another player. So at that stage, I suppose the College Egypt system was the one where you did the SAT exams. They came and watched you. You sent them maybe some newspaper cuttings and so on to get. But there's a much stronger network. By the middle of the '90s, a much stronger network established between Irish players going over to the USA than there had been in previous decades. And College Egypt was one of the places where you could go, and there was a formal pathway to going over, I suppose, really. Although players did continue to be recruited by word of mouth. Um, Another two players there, Mark Fitzgerald, another All American, and Kempis Corbally there on the joined the police force. He was actually had talking of players and what they did in their playing careers after. He was actually he had trials with Wrexham when he finished, but he developed a sort of a immune deficiency condition at that time. Um, Early 2000s when he finished the course, he'd gone for trials with Wrexham, so couldn't actually join Wrexham, and he went back to the States and joined the police force there. So he's still living over there and still doing well. He does triathlon now, actually. So moving back to the female players, there was Brona Goller and Dolores Deasley, um, who went to Hofstra. Margaret Soren as well. She actually did a master's in the Christian Brothers University. She was recruited through Gareth O'Sullivan, who'd been coaching over there, who I mentioned there previously. Um, Now, players who kind of had, I suppose, more of a professional career, you would say. You're probably familiar with Paul Keegan there. He played for New England Revolution. He finished in Boston College around '96 and played a bit, was under Frank Stapleton with New England Revolution. Came back home, played in League of Ireland, also played in Scotland as well. So I suppose you say he's one of the players that I interviewed I didn't interview, but he's one of the players who went that uh, was able to sort of break into professional football, I suppose. Another was Stephen Fox there, who did um, a degree at Fairleigh Dickinson, came back and played in League of Ireland for Bray Wanderers as well. So there were players who did come back and had careers in League of Ireland. So just conscious of time, I'm just going to go through some of the main points here. I suppose really, players would have been motivated by furthering their careers in soccer and also gaining university entry, which a lot of them felt they couldn't do in Ireland. And they saw it as an opportunity to complete a degree. I suppose the book really highlights the limited opportunities to break into full-time professional soccer in the USA and in Britain. They were coming back at an age, early 20s, when it was kind of difficult to be recruited by an English club, and most clubs would have picked up players at a much younger age in their teenage years. Uh, so also I'd say that the lack of financial security and the part-time nature of the game in Ireland hasn't changed that much really since the 40 or 50 years I covered there. Um, and this influenced a lot of soccer scholarship graduates to focus more on their careers in the bank and in finance and teaching. Some of them attempted to stay in within the football industry. One thing I didn't say was that for the female players, they would have had to give up their playing careers at an early age, like say Patricia Hughes and Colette Gilligan. I think they stopped playing in their late 20s because they just had to focus on coaching because they said it was pretty cutthroat role coaching and they had to really focus on that. Of course, they could dip in and out of it in training, but it wasn't the same for them. So they had to make that choice. Um, and again, I suppose one point I would say maybe the value of the degree that in terms of something like physical education, it mightn't be sufficient to gain employment on returning to Ireland um, after they finished the scholarship. Um, so some of them did need to do extra qualifications to get work when they came back. Um, so I'm just going to finish up by reading a quote about from Fergus Hopper, what he said, like in terms of the positive impact the scholarship had on him. He said, there he is there. I met him there a few weeks ago for coffee. He said, I'd say it benefited me very much as an individual to grow up and mature and to understand the world in a way that I don't believe I would have done if I'd stayed in Ireland. It helped definitely. It helped me in getting a degree, which I probably would not have got unless I was very lucky. It certainly helped my professional career in the bank. And I'd say it probably gave you a confidence that I don't know whether I might have had it or not, but it certainly benefited from attending college over there. So I'd say on a number of fronts, extremely positive. So um, I'm just going to finish up with that quote. And thanks for listening, and hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, Connor, for sharing through the. What's interesting, obviously, is the way this project is built on some of your previous research as well,
Mm,
and how it kind of interconnects with some of your work. So perhaps we'll just open up the floor if anyone has a burning question for Connor to begin.
yeah.
Who wants to kick off the discussion? Then I'll go ahead and jump in. Connor, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you mentioned quite a lot of connections of networks and how those
Yes.
sort of built over time. Whereas perhaps in the early years there were particular people who served as a gatekeeper, for example.
Mm,
And I'm just thinking about how that interacts in some sense, perhaps in a compare contrast way with some of the work that you did on Irish players going to the UK to play professionally. This is obviously very different. They're going to the US
yeah.
here
Yeah.
for, scholarship opportunities. But I'm just wondering, how would you compare? I mean, because all the work that you did on Irish players going from Ireland to play in the English Football League, how do you see this as very different? Is it, you mean, you mentioned a lot of anecdotal examples of, a particular person. You had this one priest who was involved with the CBC.
Mm,
How ironic, obviously, that they were not supporting soccer, whereas in St. Louis they're the key instigators for it.
right.
But there are particular people, and then it seems that you suggest that there is a sort of structuring of this with networks that are put in place and with almost a scouting system with the last example.
Yeah.
So how does that compare with the professional track?
Um, I suppose obviously, I suppose the English professional system was a lot more longer established. I suppose it was probably more of a something they would have known about. Like there was a player in the early 70s by the name of Mick Fairclough. He'd done well for Dundalk in the FAI Cup, and he was offered a chance to go to America, I think, kind of through word of mouth. And he was quoted in the newspaper saying, like, I don't really know much about this American system, and whereas the English system was, England's only an hour away. So I suppose one thing was I mean, Irish players have been going to America since the um, late 19th century. But another thing I suppose you could say was that in terms of maybe social capital, I suppose, Some of the players like Brian Murphy and Fergus Hopper, I mean, they would have come from families who would have been aware of the value of education, I think. And another player I didn't mention there was Tony Lawler. I mean, he was asked to go to England on trials when he was 14, and his family said, "No way, you're not going." He got the opportunity to go to Boston University in '84, I think, and turned into a really successful business. And so I think some of the other studies, the sociology studies that people have done on players who've gone to England, they certainly didn't have that interest in education that some of the players who went to America did. So um, I think there's been studies done on the AFL as well, in the Australian League, Aussie rules, and how players who've started doing college courses have dropped out of them, have really haven't maybe just through sheer tiredness. But I suppose the English system as well, it doesn't really encourage education. I mean, they have YTS courses and they have academy system, but really at the end of the day, it's about performance on the pitch. Whereas some of the players who entered in America, they said like, well, you've got a grade average, you got to keep that up, whatever it was, 2.0, I think. And if that drops, then you're out. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter how good you are at football. If you don't keep your academics up, you're going to lose out. So I think the social capital thing is probably one of the things. You had players who maybe had um, more interest in gaining a degree and maybe more realistic, I suppose, as well about their chances of breaking into English football. Um, but I suppose it's a much shorter sort of. I know you could call it a tradition now. Maybe it's going back to the late '60s, but it's a much shorter time span as well. Um, yeah. So I'm trying to think. Is there any other? Um, yeah. So there was very few players who would have come back then and had a go at making it in England. I suppose they were just too old maybe. And I know there have been some players like Roy Wegerle and a few of those, but not from Ireland, as far as I know. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Connor. I think I saw a hand up earlier. I don't
Yeah.
remember who it was. I see Gabe. Oh, Gabe and Patrick. Okay.
Oh,
Go ahead, Patrick.
okay. Thanks, Gabe. Hi, Connor. Thank you very much for the
Yeah.
presentation. This is Patrick Sullivan from Atlanta, Georgia. I was
Patrick.
just kind of curious if you have any um, examples of some of the impressions that the players had coming over of the quality of the college game here, where they fit in, both the male and female players. How they saw it, and also how maybe they dealt and viewed the some of the idiosyncrasies of the college game because it is still kind of a bit of an outlier here as well. And then other just I guess if they kind of relate any other impressions of living in the States at that
Yeah.
time, playing in the heat. I'm thinking in Florida for some of
Yes.
those players.
Yeah. There was definitely some players who mentioned that the heat was training in August. I think they'd start off training twice a day and doing their pre-season, and it took them a lot to get used to that. Um, but the impressions, I suppose, to go back to your first bit, I think the impressions they had of American soccer. Now there were teams who toured in the mid '70s. I think UCD went on a tour of America in the '70s as well. Um, One of the players, Richie Grant, he mentioned that, and I said this in the book, that he would see American kids coming over to play friendlies in Ireland, and they all seemed to be kind of middle class, good looking young fellas who weren't your typical kind of Irish footballers. So I mean, that was his impression of them. Anyway, that was his view. Now, but I mean, I've read other things too. I mean, Greg McElroy said when he went to University of South Florida in the early '70s that the players there didn't seem to head the ball very well. Now, I mean, again, that's a kind of a generalization, but that was one of the things he was quoted as saying in the newspapers. Um, yeah, so I think a few others said that the weight training aspect of it, they were Gareth O'Sullivan mentioned in the '80s when he went there. He mentioned that he really had to get up to standard with the weight training. He said the Americans were miles ahead, like in terms of physical strength. in that department, in the gyms and the facilities. Another thing was injury treatment as well. Like going back to the 70s, Fergus Hopper said that when he was with the Irish youth team, the trainer carried a green box with an X on it, or a cross on it. And when he went to America and he had an injury, like straight away they'd get a surgeon in, they'd get somebody to look at it. It was just, he said it was light years ahead. So yeah, it was a big transition. It was a big change for players going over there. There was homesickness. Some of the coaches were smart enough to know that they would take the players into their houses and keep them in there for a while to help them settle in as well. There was a few players, I suppose, who would have gone home because of homesickness. But I think once they adapted, I suppose another difference would have been the education system. Whereas in Ireland, the second level system was based on just exams. There was a lot of continuous assessment that they had to get used to every few months. Also more flexible as well. They could change courses if they didn't like them, um, but yeah, I mean the I suppose the guys that kind of made it, I suppose they just worked hard and they fitted in, and they weren't getting to ring home much in the 80s and that because of the cost of phone calls. There was no internet and that, and I suppose it was a massive challenge for them, really. Yeah. Um, does that answer your question? Is that
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Any other questions?
Yeah. Conor, thank you for the talk. That was quite fascinating. This is Gabe Logan from
Gabe.
Michigan. What do you see? Is this immigration pattern still taking place in the last 5 years? Are you seeing it continuing or is it recessing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question as well. I I know that there's trials advertised. I spoke to a few guys who'd gone over in the early 2000s. I didn't include them in the book, but they said that they'd gone to Scotland to do sort of academy courses to prepare them from going to America. So there seems to be a lot more kind of online kind of courses available and trials available to kind of prepare players. There's obviously there's more scholarships in Ireland now, but it's not that there wasn't any soccer scholarships in Ireland. It was just like 1979, UCD had a soccer scholarship, but the points you needed to get onto that was like a lot of players admitted they just wouldn't have reached that level. So I'm not really, I know there's players still going over there. There seems to be female players over there as well. I haven't really looked into it too much, to be honest, in terms of this pattern. I mean, Irish players aren't breaking into the Premier League in England in the way they would have been in the old First Division prior to the Bosman ruling and that, because it's just become more international, and they just so certainly, and they're not allowed to go over there now until they're 18, as far as I know. So I mean, looking to America would seem to be a sensible option, but again, I'm not sure how many of them are still doing that, like, or there's certainly more Irish coaches over there now. They should be sufficient networks um, over there now, and of course everything's online. And but I couldn't give you an idea of the figures for, say, players who went over there last year or where they went, really. But I expect it's still going on. Like, there's still players going over there. But um, I would expect it's a lot stronger now than maybe the networks maybe in the 70s or 80s. Yeah. Yeah. So nice.
Another question from elsewhere across our wide geography represented today? It's Chuck, please, Chuck.
Yeah.
Hi, Connor. Thank you very much. That was excellent. I'm
Sure.
Chuck Carlson. I'm from Chicago.
Hi.
So you talked about the quality for the men's side. What about on the women's side? The women you interviewed and spoke with, how did they find the quality of play, and how was
Yeah.
their educational experience as well?
Yeah. I think one of the first player who went over there, Anne Byrne, she did feel when she went there straight away that coming from inner city Dublin, I suppose she probably had you'd say, a working class background. Maybe she felt she was a bit more streetwise than some of the players she met over there. She said that was one of the things that struck her, that she was able to use to her advantage. But yeah, I suppose they did have good successes there in terms of uh, some of them were Hall of Famers and All Americans, um, and went on to coach over there as well. I think Patricia Hughes is heavily involved in the governing of women's soccer and colleges as well. Um, but like, I mean, I suppose in terms of fitting in, I suppose that the financial aspect would have been an issue for some players. You know, Catherine Byrne spoke of having to cut the grass, and she mentioned that they thought the Irish, because there's so much green grass in Ireland, apparently, that somebody had the idea that the Irish were great for mowing lawns, so they gave her a job cutting the grass. But she also said that part-time work just to keep them ticking over in the summer, and but she also said that they didn't really have, because whatever the type of scholarship they would have been on in the late 80s, they wouldn't have been that affluent, and some of their teammates would have brought them in food, who were on full scholarships might have brought them in food and given them a bit extra. And she mentioned surviving on a diet of M&Ms and cheese sandwiches for a while. So I guess it was pretty tough for them at times if they weren't on big money, I suppose. Um, they were only getting to go home like Christmas maybe, and then in the summer, phone calls were expensive. There was no internet at that time, as you know, really, emails. So yeah, I suppose one the problem of having to give up on the Irish national team as well, that was a bit of a sore one for them. But a lot of them seem to have stuck at it, like, and really kind of you know got their qualifications, and eligibility wise, I suppose it was a bit tough as well. I think it was Anne Byrne mentioned as well. She was kind of under the radar a bit when she finished her degree. She didn't have a green card, and but she said she felt that the Irish in Chicago, I suppose because there were so many of them, they weren't really noticed, or nobody came after them about immigration ring in the 80s. And she said if you kept your head down and just kind of got on with it, you were. Eventually, she did get the green card, but she took a job in a car dealership, I think, and she worked there for a while. And somebody gave her a social security number, and eventually she came back home to the Irish embassy, got the green card. Nobody really grilled her about it. So there was kind of things like that, I suppose, the eligibility of staying in America. And another thing I didn't mention was, the scholarship system give them the chance to go over there originally as migrants into the American system as students, whereas maybe if they were just going there as employees. I know it was probably less flexible before 9/11 from what I've heard, but it did give them the opportunity to have a life in America and have a life that they weren't going to have in Ireland. Facilities, sports career, professional career wise. But yeah, so I suppose it was tough for them being away from home and that, and um, but yeah, they seem to have settled in well, most of them. But again, they were, you know, um, some of them did rely on their coaches to help them out, and kind of a home away from home sort of thing, I think, as well. I don't know, but in terms of Irish community, some of the fellas mentioned they were like, there was Ross Hainsworth mentioned he got involved in some of the GA teams in Boston, and that helped, and kind of culturally. But most of them, didn't. Some of them felt they were just living in a bubble on campus, and that was, some of them weren't allowed to leave campus. Niall Harrison said, there was a ski slope near where they were, and they couldn't go near it. He said they weren't allowed to go to a swimming pool just outside the campus because for insurance purposes. So they were investing a lot in these players as well, and they were aware of that, I suppose. Yeah.
So had most of the women grown up playing against boys and
Yes, some of
men
them would
in
have
Ireland?
done. Catherine Byrne, her brother was an apprentice at Chelsea, in the 80s. She would have played along with Linda Gorman, who later became Republic of Ireland women's manager, and they would have just played out on the grass with the boys and wouldn't really have had much of a structure. We've done some research into the Republic of Ireland team in the 80s, and they were always kind of stuck playing 3 hours after the main game, or they might have, if they played in Dalymount Park in Dublin, they might have kicked off at 12 o'clock, and the main match wasn't on until 3, so it wasn't really on the same terms. But yeah, I suppose a lot of women's soccer in Ireland didn't really start development until the 1970s, so there wouldn't have been that many clubs maybe outside Dublin. There was a decent indoor soccer league for in some places like in Drogheda, Dundalk, in some parts of the countryside. But um, really, most of the teams were in Dublin. But again, facilities wise, I've heard stories of them having to change in cars. They wouldn't have had, you know, the best of pitches, things like that. It would have been pretty basic for them. But so some of them would have got in with men's teams and played a bit with the boys growing up. And I mean, school teams, they wouldn't really have had female school teams until maybe the mid 90s. So it was tough for them to get any kind of proper structure. So America really was the best option for them, really. They wanted to
Thank you.
progress in soccer. Thanks.
Connor's just. Oh yeah, go ahead, Patrick. Yeah, I see you
Yeah,
had another
Connor,
question.
I was just wondering, were there any assumptions that maybe I know this has been ongoing research for you for quite a while, but were there any assumptions that you had maybe when you started your research or after going through maybe some of the newspaper clippings that were then challenged or kind of upended a bit when you had some of when you conducted the interviews with some of these players? Were there any things that
Um,
maybe you had an idea about that wasn't quite the case, or
I think I had a good idea of how they got there, of how they were recruited, because you had all these newspaper reports saying like, "well, such and such has been is moving to Boston University or Boston College," and local newspapers covered that as well. But what I really didn't know about was what happened to them when they went there. Did they stay there? Did they succeed? Did they come back home? How did they cope? There wasn't really too much, unless somebody maybe got an all American award or got to national championships. They weren't really featuring in the Irish newspapers after that. So that was a huge gap for me. Like after I'd done the bits about how they actually got there and how they were recruited. In terms of assumptions, um, yeah, I don't know. Not really so much. Like I mean, I don't think I kind of. It was more like what actually happens to them when they get there, and firstly, who are these players? Like where, I would have known of some of them. Like I knew of Brian Murphy because he played Gaelic football around the same time I was. I was the same age as him, and we played Gaelic football. And I kind of heard of him on the TV and the newspapers, but um, wouldn't have known about the likes of Fergus Hopper until they actually did some real research into them and tried to locate them maybe on LinkedIn and places like that and through word of mouth. Yeah, so no, it was a really interesting project to do. It was really fascinating. Like I got to look at some of the SASH documents as well, the Bill Graham books and some of the college records. I didn't actually get to go to America to look at anything just because of different reasons, funding and so on like that. But um, yeah, it was a pretty good experience writing about it. Yeah.
and just one quick follow up? Did you how did the interview process go? Did you have any people that maybe weren't as forthcoming, or were they pretty open to talking about their experiences?
Yeah, no, I felt they were once I got talking to them and they saw I wasn't a journalist and they um, were happy to share for the most part. There was only one player. I found it harder to get female players for some reason, maybe just because I don't have as many contacts in the game. But there was one player who did kind of say to me, "Well, how am I going to be reimbursed for this kind of thing?" She was an Irish international and seemed to think that should have been paid for doing the interview. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't. I've interviewed loads of players and played in England and everywhere else, and it's not like that kind of thing. But so we didn't end up doing an interview then. But for the most part, everybody was kind of like the ones they did with the players based in America was mainly on Zoom, um, and they were all pretty helpful, give up their time. They had to sign a consent form then at the end, like just for the publishers, and pretty much did that. Yeah, so it's just a pity I didn't get to have a book launch or anything. Like it's just didn't have anything like that over here this time. But yeah, no, it's great just to get it on paper and get it all put together. Um, yeah, but yeah, so I suppose maybe I could have extended it out to look more at coaches, and Ed Kelly was the only one I'd spoken to. But yeah, I just decided 2000 was the cutoff because after 2000, it just seemed kind of snowball in terms of figures and so on. I thought 20th century will just be okay. Yeah, so that was it.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks,
Thanks.
thanks,
One
Patrick.
other one other quick follow-up, Connor. I was curious because you mentioned obviously GAA at one point
Mm,
as being, I mean, we know that as an impediment to the development of soccer in some cases.
yes.
And on the flip side, I was thinking on American shores, GAA does have a presence and historically did have a presence across East Coast cities and elsewhere. But I wondered
Mm,
if there were any connections of players coming in, you know, for other reasons, perhaps, to the States, joining GAA clubs, and then shifting over and seeing an opportunity, perhaps, for a scholarship at a university by switching codes. Was there any let's say use of a sort of GAA channel that where you saw people coming through, or were they really just two separate worlds? Players playing in Ireland who are looking at playing soccer in the US
yeah,
versus the GA community, which was just completely a different one.
yeah. It seems to be pretty. I mean, I mentioned Ross Hainsworth there. He went to Northeastern University. He kind of played a bit of GA over there. Now, some players came back home, and John Kent, he kept playing Gaelic when he came back to Ireland. But in terms of GA players, I suppose you know what happened in Ireland up until the 90s probably was that leading inter-county GA players would go to America in the summer and get a job on a building site, get paid maybe, and play for a team like Donegal, New York, or some of those GA teams in the American Championships. But I didn't find any examples of any sort of crossover from those channels. It's funny you mentioned that because there were some cases of a few players who left the scholarship system to go and act as place kickers for American football teams. There was one who, Neil O'Donoghue was his name, I think, in the 80s. He had started off on a soccer scholarship, and I think the scholarship fell through, and he moved to a university and started playing American football. He's kind of unique in a couple of different ways. I think he was one of the tallest place kickers ever. He was 6'6" or something like that. But he ended up playing for Minnesota Vikings. Um, Never won a Super Bowl or anything. But it's funny because currently you see a trend where there's GA players going to America and becoming place kickers, field goal kickers, and that. There was a guy from Derry there who's just been axed by I think it was the New York Giants or Jets, I'm not sure which, but they have trials and everything for them now where they can go over and do that. There's been a few that there's Charlie Smith as well, I think from County Down, who's playing over there. But no, didn't really see that, Kevin. I don't think in terms of those from the GA world over in the States sort of moving into the soccer scholarships as far as I'm aware. More common they would have played a bit of GA in Ireland and then went to America and maybe played it a bit when they come back on their summer holidays, maybe. But not really that much transfer while they were over there, I don't think. Yeah.
And the male players were they
Mm,
all essentially 17, 18 year olds, or did you have because oftentimes with
yeah.
international players they would come in as older players into the NCAA system, and I was curious what the age range was of the players that you interviewed. Did you see that when they were there in the States, they were really US college age, or was there a
Yeah,
variety there at all?
seems to be from about 18 to 22, I think. Catherine Byrne, she was 22, I think, when she went there. Um, Now, I read somewhere that I think if you're over 24, you can't do a scholarship, or you couldn't that time. But your eligibility goes. But no, pretty much the ones I interviewed were all teenagers, like started off as teenagers and stayed there till their early 20s, as far as I know. I'm trying to think. I think Kempis Carbley, um, he was probably about 19. He might have been one of the oldest ones, I think. Maybe 19 when he went to Providence College in 98, I think. But yeah, pretty much late teens, I'd say, to early 20s would have been the age range, I think. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much, Colin. Anyone else for a final question for Connor before we wrap up? All right. Well, Connor, thank you so much again for coming on to a SASH First Friday session and providing us the results of some long awaited research. So that's really exciting. A reminder to our listeners that the recording of this will be available online on the SASH YouTube, and it will be transformed into a podcast. Thank you to Brian Corstadt for that. The book link will be also available on all the SASH links there. So please do get your copy of Blue Chippers with Peter Lang or through an independent bookstore. And as it's our last session of the year, it is simply just up to me to say, wishing everyone a good end of the year, good December, and that. We have already a good lineup set up for the spring, for the winter and spring into 26. We've got sessions planned. January is almost confirmed. February, our own Chuck Carlson here will be leading a very interesting panel for the February session. And then in March, we've already got a session planned with Sean Jacobs, who's going to come talk to us about some players who played with the Ukrainian nationals. So there's already a planning and programming already into the spring, and we'll have more all the way up to the lead up to the World Cup, which is probably the perfect segue to close our session today, as we will go and discover what the final situation is for the World Cup draw of 2026 on the men's side. So again, thank you very much, Connor, for coming and speak to us today, and wishing everyone all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. See you next. Bye.